Have you ever wondered how close you've come to danger without even realizing it? At Shivering Vault, we take you there, one story at a time. But before you drift off, consider liking this video, commenting where you're watching from and at what time, and subscribing to keep these chilling stories coming. Now, let's dive into these unsettling tales. It was a chilly Friday night in my small town, somewhere tucked off a back road in central California. A strip of highway with a handful of buildings, a few fast food joints, and my 24-hour gas station. Not exactly the place where anything exciting ever happened. I didn't mind the quiet. I was 26, a college dropout, and working the graveyard shift. 1 a.m. to 7 a.m. at the gas station was pretty much the only job I could find after I dropped out. It was about 2:03 a.m. when the weirdness started. I was behind the counter, stacking cases of drinks back into the cooler. The place was empty. Again. Just the usual truckers, maybe a couple of late-night travelers who needed gas or snacks. The same old faces, a comfortable routine. The only thing to worry about was keeping the place clean and making sure the coffee was fresh for anyone who came in. But that night was different. I felt it the moment the knock came. At first, I thought it was just some trucker or maybe a customer I hadn't noticed pulling in, but then the knock came again and my blood froze in my veins. It wasn't the typical knock you'd expect from a door. This one was slow, deliberate. It echoed in the silence, the kind of knock that felt wrong. I stood still for a second, trying to make sense of it. The knock came again, louder this time, but muffled, almost like it came from the back of the station. The delivery door, the one no one should be anywhere near. It wasn't even a door that customers would normally use. My gut twisted. I put the drinks down carefully, trying not to make any noise. Something was off. I don't know how I knew, but I just knew. My breath started to catch in my throat as I stepped toward the security monitor. The flickering black and white footage of the station showed the back lot, but no one was visible at first. I leaned closer, squinting at the screen. That's when I saw them, two shadows. Not the usual shape of someone standing outside, but crouched as if they were hiding, moving just beyond the line of sight of the camera. One of them was holding something. At first, I thought it was a crowbar, but the longer I stared, the more I realized it was a tire iron. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I didn't waste any time. My hand shot out and locked the front door. It wasn't much, but it was all I could do at that moment. The hairs on my neck stood up as I watched the feed again. One of them was creeping closer to the back door, and I could hear a faint sound in the background. The low hum of the station's AC and the sound of footsteps in the gravel. There was no way this was normal. I stepped back into the office, a small room that was basically just a steel box with a desk, some papers, and a phone. My hands were shaking, but I picked up the phone and dialed 911. I whispered into the receiver, trying not to let the panic slip into my voice. There's someone outside by the back door. I think they're trying to break in. The dispatcher on the other end of the line asked me to stay calm. She told me to lock all the doors and stay in a safe place. My eyes flicked back to the monitor. The shadows were moving again, closer now. I heard the faintest sound, a scraping noise, like metal against concrete. The knock came again, this time louder, more urgent. My heart was pounding in my chest. I'm not sure how long I was in that office, but the time seemed to stretch forever. The dispatcher's voice was the only thing keeping me from completely losing it. Help is on the way, she said over and over, but I wasn't so sure. I didn't trust the silence of the night. The way everything felt wrong. I kept my eyes glued to the monitor, watching the shadows shift on the back of the building. The rattling of the back door had stopped for a moment, but I could hear the unmistakable sound of someone fiddling with the handle, the door handle, trying to force it open. A wave of cold sweat rolled down my back. I didn't want to imagine what they looked like. What kind of people would be out here at this hour, creeping around the back of a gas station with a tire iron? But my mind was working overtime, painting 1,000 terrible scenarios. Maybe they were after something in the station. I glanced back at the monitor. The other shadow had moved around the side of the building. There was no sound. Just the black and white feed showing nothing but the empty lot and the occasional flicker of the overhead security lights. Then the lights flickered. Once. Twice. I froze. The power box was outside. If they cut the power, I wouldn't be able to see them anymore. Panic spiked in my chest. I texted my manager, trying to keep it together. Someone's trying to break in. I'm locked in the office. I heard the door rattle again, but this time it wasn't just a little shake. It was forceful, like someone had thrown their weight against it. A heavy thud followed by the sound of scraping metal. I could hear one of them yelling something under their breath. The panic was setting in now, thick and suffocating. Then the worst thing happened. I heard footsteps, loud, fast. They were circling the front door. I held my breath, trying to make as little noise as possible. I could hear them tugging at the handle, pulling it in short, jerky motions. They were trying to get in. And just as the dispatcher said, "Help is on the way," I saw the back door groan. It gave way. The sharp screech of metal on metal echoed through the station, and I could see the figure of a man slipping into the stockroom, his body silhouetted in the dim light. I was paralyzed. The sirens were the first sound I heard that gave me hope. I could see them now, red and blue flashing lights flooding the parking lot through the window. The figures of 2 officers emerged, running toward the front of the station. The man at the front door panicked and made a break for it. He turned, running straight into the arms of one of the officers. They tackled him to the ground, both of them struggling for a moment before securing him in cuffs. The other man, the one who had slipped inside, was still in the stockroom. I watched in horrified silence as the officers burst through the back door, their guns drawn. He didn't even get the chance to fight back. Turns out, these 2 men, along with another accomplice who had apparently been waiting nearby, had just pulled off a robbery at a liquor store a couple of days ago. They'd been laying low, hoping to get away unnoticed. I never found out if they knew the station was a perfect place to hide out, or if they had just gotten desperate. The thing that stuck with me was that they had a gun. I don't know if the one in the stockroom ever meant to use it, but he had it tucked under his jacket. I shudder every time I think about what might have happened if the cops had gotten there even a minute later. I stayed locked in that office until I was sure it was over. The officers came and checked everything. They asked if I needed a ride home. I was too shaken to say anything more than, "No, I'm fine." But I wasn't fine. That was the last time I worked a night shift. I'm just thankful I didn't end up on the wrong side of the gun that night. My name's Marissa. I'm 27 years old, and I work as a bartender at a little beachside bar in Santa Barbara. It's not the kind of place that draws in a fancy crowd, but it's always been good to me. The regulars are nice, and the tips are decent. But tonight was different. I'd just finished up my shift, the last call had been served, and the place was already cleaned up. It was just past 2 a.m. when I clocked out, stepped outside into the cool night air, and began walking home. The streets were empty, typical for a Thursday night, and the only noise was the soft crash of the ocean waves in the distance. I pulled my hoodie tighter around myself as I made my way down the sidewalk. The streetlights flickered overhead. It wasn't an unsafe neighborhood by any means, but it wasn't exactly a place you'd want to be walking alone at this hour. Still, I had done this walk hundreds of times before. It wasn't a long trek, just about 15 minutes from the bar to my little house. But tonight felt different. I don't know why I noticed it at first. Maybe it was the quiet, or maybe it was just my nerves after a long shift. But halfway home, I felt watched. I glanced over my shoulder and saw him. A man. He was in a dark hoodie, his face mostly hidden in shadow. He was walking several paces behind me, but not too far. At first, I thought it was nothing. Maybe another person out late, maybe a fellow night owl. But then, I crossed the street. I didn't think much of it, just a quick detour through a better lit block to feel a bit safer. And then I noticed he crossed the street too. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I pulled out my phone like it was no big deal and pretended to talk to a friend. Anything to look like I was distracted, like I wasn't scared. But when I glanced back, the man in the hoodie was still there, still behind me. He hadn't sped up, hadn't slowed down. It was almost like he was just walking at the same pace, keeping the same distance. My heart started to race. Maybe it's just a coincidence, I tried to tell myself. Maybe he's just going in the same direction. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. My mind started to race too, imagining all sorts of terrible scenarios. I picked up my pace. I could see the lights of a 24-hour diner just ahead, a little greasy spot near the old train tracks. I knew the cook inside, a gruff guy named Charlie. He was always there, always friendly. I figured if nothing else, I could duck inside, pretend to grab a coffee, and figure out what to do next. As I neared the diner, I glanced back again. The man was still there. He hadn't sped up, but he hadn't slowed down either. I pushed through the door, the bell above it jingling as I walked in, and quickly made my way to the counter. Charlie looked up from the grill as I slid onto the stool. "Hey, Marissa? Late night?" I gave him a shaky smile. "Yeah, I think someone's following me." Charlie raised an eyebrow, but his face quickly shifted to concern. "You're serious?" I nodded, glancing out the window at the figure in the hoodie, who was still standing on the street, just outside, hands in his pockets. He wasn't looking around, wasn't pacing. He was just standing there, staring through the glass at me. "Call the cops," I whispered, my voice trembling despite myself. "Please." Charlie didn't argue, didn't ask questions. He simply picked up the phone behind the counter and dialed. I tried to keep my hands steady, but my fingers were numb. I could feel my chest tightening with every breath. The man didn't come inside. He didn't move at all. He just stood there under the flickering street lamp, motionless. The diner was small, and I could feel the tension in the air. Charlie didn't look at me, just kept his back to the grill, pretending like everything was normal. But I could tell he was watching the man outside through the corner of his eye, and I could tell the man was watching me. It felt like hours before the sirens finally wailed in the distance. I stood up quickly, but Charlie waved me back down. "Relax," he said, his voice low. "They'll take care of it." A couple of minutes later, 2 squad cars rolled up quietly, their lights flashing, but their sirens off. One cop got out and walked toward the man, while the other stayed in the car, eyes on me. I watched as he sprinted off, his hoodie bouncing with each step, but the cops were fast. Within seconds, the other officer was out of the car, chasing him down. The man didn't make it far before he was tackled to the ground. They arrested him quickly. I stayed inside the diner, still too shaken to leave, watching as the officers cuffed him and threw him into the back of one of the squad cars. They didn't even bother with questions right away. I heard one of the officers talking to Charlie in low tones. Something about his ID. That's when things took a turn. The officer came back into the diner. "Ma'am," he said to me, "we need to take a statement." I nodded, my mouth dry, still trying to process everything. The officer explained that the man I had seen had been linked to at least 3 other stalking cases around the area. Women working late-night shifts at bars, restaurants, and diners. They'd found his backpack. Inside, there was a folding knife, a pair of gloves, and some zip ties. Nothing too out of the ordinary for a guy like him, I guess. But what made my blood run cold was the notepad they found. It was full of details about other women in the area, women just like me. It had our schedules, our routines, the times we worked, even the places we walked home. I could barely keep my eyes open as I realized he'd been watching me for weeks. I wasn't the first woman he'd targeted. I gave my statement, trying not to shake too much. For a while, I stopped walking home at night. Even during the day, I started taking cabs. It's been a few weeks now, and I still can't get the image of him standing under that street lamp, just staring out of my head. Every time I walk home, I find myself looking over my shoulder, wondering if someone's there. It was the start of my first solo shift as a nursing assistant at the senior residence. I was excited. Yeah, I know, it sounds weird. Who gets excited about working a night shift at a retirement home? Uh, but I was 24, new to the job, and the idea of being responsible for a whole wing by myself kind of made me feel grown up. The residence itself wasn't old, but it still had that old, musty smell that clings to places where people have lived for a long time. You know, that mix of medication, dust, and worn-out furniture. The patients were mostly deep sleepers, thank God. And my job wasn't exactly intense. Wellness checks every hour, logging reports, and prepping meds for the next day. Nothing to really stress over. By the time 2 a.m. rolled around, I had already restocked the supplies in the East Wing, checked on Mr. Stokes, who always tried to convince me he was a retired secret agent, and started my rounds through the corridors. The hallways were quiet, almost eerily so. The soft hum of the ventilation system was the only sound, making everything feel strangely hollow. I made my way down the long corridor that ran past the residents' rooms, the yellow light from the ceiling fixtures flickering here and there. I had just turned into the service hallway to grab some more linens when I heard it. A soft clang, almost like metal hitting concrete. It came from the far end of the service hallway near the rear entrance. I froze, my eyes darted toward the sound. For a moment I thought maybe it was just a door shifting or a pipe rattling, anything normal. But then I heard it. The unmistakable sound of a door creaking shut. I felt my stomach lurch. I had just locked that door. It was routine. We always lock that service door after hours. So why was it open? I glanced at my watch. 2:17 a.m. A bead of cold sweat formed on the back of my neck as I turned my head slowly, almost afraid of what I might see. But there was nothing, just the dim hallway. I walked back to the nurse's station and peered through the security monitors mounted on the wall. The grainy footage showed nothing out of the ordinary, until I focused on the rear service entrance. My heart skipped a beat, a shadow, a figure. It moved too fast for me to clearly identify, but it was definitely there, slipping through the rear service door and into the building. I could barely make out the shape. It looked like a man, tall, moving with some sort of quiet urgency. My pulse raced. No one was supposed to be here. The only people with access to the rear service entrance were staff members, and I had double-checked that everyone had clocked out for the night. I locked the nurse's station door, my hands trembling as I picked up the phone. I called 911. The line rang 3 times before the operator picked up, and all I could do was whisper, "Someone's in the building. They're not supposed to be here. Please send help." I couldn't stop shaking as I sat in that little glass-enclosed nurse's station, clutching the phone to my ear, staring at the monitor. I didn't know who it was, but I knew they weren't supposed to be here. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. I was hyper-aware of every little sound, the hum of the ventilation system, the soft tap of my foot against the tile floor as I nervously shifted my weight. I felt like I was being watched. The clock ticked on. I glanced at it again, 2:27 a.m. The soft murmur of the 911 operator echoed in my ear, the voice telling me that help was on the way, but every minute felt like an hour. I kept my eyes glued to the monitor. The shadow hadn't reappeared, but I was sure it was still out there. I don't know what made me do it, but I stood up and grabbed the flashlight from the desk drawer. My fingers were cold and stiff, and it took a few tries before I could get the damn thing to turn on. I had to check. I moved slowly, trying not to make a sound as I crept out of the nurse's station and into the hallway. The building felt so much bigger at night, its empty halls stretching out in every direction, bathed in yellow light. My feet were nearly silent on the polished tile floor, but every step seemed amplified in my ears. The silence was suffocating. I reached the intersection of the main corridor and the service hallway. The service door, which I had definitely locked earlier, stood slightly ajar. The doorframe was dark, as though something was hiding in the shadows just beyond it. I didn't want to get closer, but my feet were already moving. I approached it with the flashlight held out in front of me, the beam cutting through the dark, illuminating the edges of the door. My breathing felt shallow, and I didn't even realize how much my hands were shaking until I saw the beam tremble. I was about to push the door open when I heard a sound from behind me, a soft shuffle of footsteps. My heart lurched in my chest. I spun around, the beam of the flashlight sweeping across the hall. Nothing. No one. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I turned back toward the door. My instincts screamed at me to run, to get to the other side of the building, but something inside me, something stupid, made me reach for the door handle. I slowly turned it. The door creaked open just enough for me to peer inside. I didn't see anything at first, but as my eyes adjusted to the dark, I could make out something in the far corner. A shadow. It was a person, crouched low to the floor, barely visible in the dark. My breath hitched in my throat. I slammed the door shut, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't know what I had just seen, but I was sure of one thing. I wasn't alone. By the time the police arrived, I was a wreck. I could hardly breathe from the panic that had taken over, but I managed to tell them what had happened. They didn't waste any time. They told me to stay put in the nurse's station while they did a sweep of the building. I watched through the small window as officers moved quietly down the hall, their flashlights flicking across the walls. The place felt empty, lifeless, except for the sense of danger that hung in the air. It felt like hours before they radioed in. "Found someone," one of the officers said. "Male, hiding under a gurney in the unused med bay." My stomach twisted. The officers dragged him out, handcuffing him, their faces grim. He was dirty, disheveled, and looked like he hadn't slept in days. As they let him out, one of them glanced over at me. "Do you recognize this man?" he asked. I stared at the man. His face was familiar, but I couldn't place where I'd seen him before. He wasn't a resident. He wasn't one of the other staff members. Then it clicked. It was Brian. He was someone I'd seen around months ago. Brian. He'd worked here briefly before I started, but he'd been fired for stealing narcotics. I didn't know all the details, but I knew he wasn't someone you'd want around. When the police dragged him out, it didn't take long for it to click. He wasn't here for some random reason. He wasn't just trying to cause a scare. He was after something specific. The guy had gloves on and a duffel bag. He had fake credentials too, probably to make it look like he still worked here. The whole thing seemed well thought out. He wasn't just after narcotics. The place had equipment we kept in storage, stuff like IV pumps, wheelchairs, things that could easily be sold. He knew exactly where to go and what to grab. The officers took him away, and the weight of it hit me. He had been here to steal medical supplies, not to break in for some petty reason. He had been planning this for a while. Even now, when I think back to that moment, I can't help but feel lucky. If I hadn't heard that noise and checked the monitor, who knows how long he would have been in there, how much stuff he would have taken. My name is Derek, I'm 24, and I drive for a food delivery service. I do it mostly at night, which means I get used to the quiet streets, the empty roads, and the occasional weird vibes that come with late shifts. I live in a small California suburb, so most of the deliveries I make are to sleepy neighborhoods or rundown businesses. You get used to it. No one's ever really up, so the roads are empty and all you have are the sounds of your engine, the hum of the AC, and the occasional whiff of fast food. To be honest, I kind of liked the solitude. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it helped pay for rent and classes. I wasn't exactly living the dream, but I was surviving. That was enough. One night, I remember it was around 2:15 a.m., I got a ping for a delivery. I checked my phone, $25 tip. The address? A motel I'd driven past hundreds of times but had never bothered to stop at. It was called the Golden Crest Motel, and it was exactly what you'd expect from a place at the edge of a small town. The neon sign was half broken, flickering like it was about to die at any second. The building itself looked like it had been neglected for years, the paint peeling off in some places, the windows dirty and cracked. But the tip was tempting, and I wasn't about to turn down that kind of money, especially for a delivery that should only take 10 minutes. The directions told me to go around the back, so I did. As I turned the corner, I could see the faint glow of a couple of old, flickering lights near the parking lot. The place looked abandoned, like no one had stayed there in months. There were weeds growing through the cracked pavement. A few cars were scattered around, mostly old sedans and rusted trucks. The parking lot felt empty, but not in the peaceful way. It was the kind of empty where you feel like someone's watching you, even if they aren't. I parked near room 9, which was where the delivery was supposed to go. I checked my phone again just to make sure I had the right place. It was. I grabbed the bag of food, shoved my phone into my pocket, and stepped out of the car. The air was chilly, but not enough to make me shiver. It felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. I walked down the path that led to the rooms. The faded numbers on the doors seemed almost deliberate, like the place had once been full of life and now was slowly being forgotten by everyone. As I reached room 9, I hesitated for a second. The door was closed, but I could see a faint light slipping through the cracks around it. I knocked once. No answer. I looked over my shoulder, scanning the parking lot. Still empty. No cars moving, no one walking around. I raised my hand to knock again, but before I could even lift it, the door swung open. 2 men rushed out, grabbing me by the arms. I barely had time to react. The first thing I noticed was the knife. It was a big, hunting-style knife, the kind you only see in movies. The guy holding it looked at me with cold eyes, like he had no intention of letting me go. The second guy was already ripping my phone out of my hand, shoving it into his pocket without saying a word. "Give us your wallet," the first guy growled, the blade catching the dim light from the hallway. I could feel my heart thumping in my chest, my mouth going dry. "Give it to him," the guy with the knife repeated. The second guy was already rifling through my pockets, pulling out my wallet and tossing it to the side. I could hear the third guy. He was sitting at the corner of the room in a cheap plastic chair, not moving, just staring at me. He didn't say a word, and I swear there was something wrong with his face. I knew this wasn't just some random robbery. This was planned. I had a second to think. Just a second. Without thinking too much, I jerked my elbow back, slamming it into the guy holding me. I didn't even know how I managed to do it. I guess panic is a hell of a motivator. The guy staggered back, and I used that split second of space to shove my shoulder into the door and slam it open. I didn't wait to see if they were going to chase me. I didn't care. I bolted. The air outside was cold against my skin as I sprinted toward the parking lot, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. I could hear footsteps behind me, heavy and fast, but I didn't dare look back. I just ran. I reached the edge of the parking lot and saw headlights coming down the road. It was a car, an old blue sedan. I waved my arms frantically, shouting, "Help! Help!" The car slowed and stopped, and the driver, an older man, rolled down the window. "What's going on?" he asked, eyes wide. "Please, call the cops. 2 guys in that motel. They're trying to rob me." He didn't hesitate. "Get in. I'll take you to the nearest gas station." I jumped into the passenger seat without a second thought, and the guy sped off toward the nearest gas station, his hands gripping the wheel with white knuckles. He wasn't asking questions, just looking straight ahead. Once we were parked, I dialed 911 with shaking hands. I gave them the motel address, my description of the men, everything I could think of. A few minutes later, I saw the flashing lights of a cop car in the distance. The police were fast, faster than I expected, honestly. By the time they arrived, they had already been looking into similar incidents in the area. Apparently, I wasn't the first delivery driver to get attacked near that motel. There had been 3 others in the last couple of months. They found the room, busted in, and arrested the guys. They took everything: stolen phones, fake IDs, a burner phone with notes on it, addresses, and a list of potential victims. The police said they were running a scam using the motel to lure delivery drivers, robbing them, and sometimes worse. I still remember the cops telling me how lucky I was to get out. I was lucky I hadn't been trapped. I was lucky I didn't get hurt worse. I guess I was, but that didn't change the fact that I was shaken up, my hands still trembling long after the adrenaline had worn off. I quit doing night shifts after that. I couldn't look at those empty streets the same way again. Sure, I still deliver food, but only during the day now. I don't care how much money the night shifts pay. And I keep a box cutter in my glove compartment now, just in case. I've been driving trucks for nearly 15 years, crisscrossing the country with nothing but the hum of the engine and the glow of the headlights to keep me company. Over time, you get used to the solitude. Hell, sometimes it's even peaceful. But there are nights like this one, that test your nerves and make you question everything. It was just after 2:30 a.m. when I pulled into a small, nearly deserted rest stop along a stretch of highway in Northern California. The truck was heavy and the road was long, but I had been pushing myself to make good time. My eyes were tired, my back sore, and I knew I couldn't keep going without a break. The lot was almost empty, just a few rigs parked beneath the flickering lights of the overhead lamps. The rest of the place looked abandoned. I could see a few shadows of trees in the distance, swaying gently in the cool breeze, but otherwise it was just empty asphalt. I parked my truck in a far corner near the edge of the lot, far away from the other trucks. There was something about that spot that made me feel better, like I had my space, my little corner of peace. I double-checked the locks on the trailer. I grabbed my jacket and climbed into the sleeper berth, closing the heavy curtain behind me. The inside was cold and smelled like old coffee and diesel, but it was cozy enough for a quick nap. I set the alarm for 3:30 a.m., giving myself an hour to recharge before hitting the road again. I settled into the thin mattress. The quiet, the stillness of the night settled over me like a heavy blanket. I was almost asleep when something woke me up. A tap. Light, sharp, but unmistakable. My heart skipped a beat. I lay there for a second, listening. The truck was idling gently, and the rest stop was eerily quiet. There was nothing else. No one else. Another tap, louder this time. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. For a moment, I thought I might have imagined it, maybe just a bit of my mind playing tricks on me. But then it came again, a sharp, quick tap on the driver's side window. I slowly rolled over and pulled back the curtain, peeking through the small gap. The parking lot was still empty. No one was around, just the faint glow of the parking lights and the shadows stretching across the pavement. I sat up, still trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe a branch or a piece of debris had blown against the truck. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I pushed open the door and stepped out, the cold air biting at my skin. My boots hit the asphalt with a dull thud as I looked around. Nothing. I was about to climb back in when I heard it, a metallic click, low and deliberate, coming from the back of my trailer. I froze. My heart rate picked up, blood rushing in my ears. I had locked the trailer before coming in here, and I knew for a fact that the latch on the back was secure. But that sound, it was too precise to be a coincidence. Someone had undone it. Someone had gotten into my trailer. Without thinking, I grabbed my flashlight and clicked it on, the beam cutting through the darkness. The light from the truck's overhead lamps did little to illuminate the area beyond the immediate vicinity. My boots crunched over the gravel as I made my way to the back of the rig. As I neared the trailer, I saw it. One of the cargo latches had been unhooked. I was sure I had locked it. I always lock it. But now, it was hanging open. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Someone had been here, and they weren't just trying to steal from me. They were methodical. I could tell by the way the latch had been undone, so clean, so precise. A feeling of dread hit me hard. But I had to know what was going on. I had to figure out if I was in danger. I crouched down to inspect the ground, shining the flashlight over the gravel. There, fresh boot prints. The kind you get from someone who's been walking around, just enough to leave a mark, but not enough to be seen easily in the dark. They led off into the distance, disappearing into the shadows. Another sound, a soft clank, like metal scraping against metal, came from a truck parked a few rows over. I froze again, listening. There were figures, 3 of them, moving quickly but silently. They were creeping from one truck to the next, working together like they'd done this 100 times before. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking as I dialed 911. My voice was low, almost a whisper, as I described what was happening. "They're stealing from the trucks. I think they've done it before," I said, trying to keep calm. I kept the flashlight trained on the figures, barely moving, but unable to tear my eyes away. The trio worked like clockwork, each of them slipping between trucks, undoing locks, rummaging through whatever they could. I could see the flash of a tool, a crowbar, maybe, and I knew these people weren't just amateurs. They knew exactly what they were doing. The line went silent for a moment, and I felt my stomach churn as I waited for the operator to respond. But then, almost out of nowhere, I saw the blue and red lights flash in the distance. It was the cops arriving without sirens. The 3 figures didn't see them coming. The moment the police vehicles screeched to a halt, 2 of them bolted. They ran in opposite directions, but they didn't get far. The cops were on them fast, one of them tackling a guy to the ground, the other rounding the corner of a trailer where another one was hiding. The third? They found him trying to sneak out of a truck's cab, like he thought he could just slip away unnoticed. He wasn't fast enough. I stayed behind, my legs trembling as I watched the whole thing unfold. The cops were quick, and they didn't waste any time. Within minutes, the thieves were cuffed and thrown into the back of a squad car. I stood there, my flashlight still in hand, feeling a mix of relief and disbelief. They didn't speak much to me at first, just asked the usual questions. Did I see anything? Did I notice anything suspicious? I gave them what I could, trying to stay calm. I was still shaking, trying to process what had just happened. After a while, one of the officers came over to me. "These guys aren't new to this," he said, his voice low. "They've been working the highway, hitting trucks like yours for weeks, always at night." I didn't say anything. I just nodded. The officers told me to stay put as they searched the thieves' vehicle, parked at the far end of the lot. I watched as they pulled out bags of stolen goods, electronics, tools, even some small items from my trailer. Tools used to bypass standard truck locks, things that could make an experienced thief unstoppable. It wasn't the first time they'd done this, I could tell. I finished my route the next day, though it wasn't easy. The truck seemed heavier, the road seemed longer, and the idea of stopping at another rest stop made my stomach turn. From that night on, I never looked at rest stops the same. That's it for today's tale from Shivering Vault. If you have a story worth sharing, drop it in the comments or send it our way. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your fellow thrill seekers. As always, the Shivering Vault thanks you for unlocking today's tale. Until next time, the vault awaits your return.